Good morning, brothers and sisters, and welcome to our funny worship service here with a snow day, so to speak. And hopefully, the snow actually comes. I'm still standing here at the church now at 3 o'clock, and hasn't started yet, but we were told it was coming in kind of the afternoon evening period. So, Lord willing, we'll have canceled for a good reason. But at any rate, we get to hear God's word today, and that is glorious. Now, what I would recommend you do is pause the video now if you're able to, and read the whole of chapter 13, Mark 13, to really get the context of what this discourse is about. It's called the Olivet Discourse, and just to understand what the whole scope of it is, and will give you a clear vision. For the sake of time and for the sake of this video, I'm going to just go through from from 13 verse 14 through 37. So we're not going to read what we read last week, but it's still helpful to know where it was coming from. So anyway, here we go. We're reading this. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought not, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the roof, on the housetop, not go down into the house, nor enter to take anything out of his house. And let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant, and to those who are nursing babies in those days. And pray that your flight may not be in winter. For in those days there will be tribulation such as has not been seen since the beginning of creation, which God created until this time, nor ever shall be. And unless the Lord had shortened those days, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, whom he chose, he shortened the days. Then if anyone says to you, "Look, here is the Christ," or "Look, he is there," do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will rise and show signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. But take heed. See, I have told you all things beforehand. But in those days, after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars of heaven will fall, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And then he will send his angels and gather together his elect from the four winds and from the farthest parts of the earth to the farthest part of heaven. Now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So you also, when you see these things happening, know that it is near at the doors. Assuredly, I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Take heed, watch, and pray, for you do not know when the time is. It is like a man going to a far country, who left his house and gave authority to his servants, and to each his work, and commanded the doorkeeper to watch. Watch, therefore, for you do not know when the master of the house is coming, in the evening, at midnight, at the crowing of the rooster, or in the morning, lest coming suddenly he find you sleeping. And what I say to you, I say to all, watch. So, brothers and sisters, we enter into this point here in this discourse, understanding what is going on. Jesus is sitting sort of as a king, looking over his city, his beloved city. And we can say that he's sitting there as a king because, indeed, the past few chapters have been pointing to his kingship, his lordship. Right? He goes into Jerusalem with this triumphant march, and he comes in and he kicks everything down, and we've talked about that last week. And then just recently, right, we were talking, or just before our text, I guess 2 weeks ago, right, we heard of the stuff from when he's discussing with these scribes and Pharisees about who David's son is, right? And this idea that he is indeed this king who is going to be sitting at the right hand of the Father, right? And is going to have all his enemies put down as his footstool. And so now he's sitting across from Jerusalem, sitting on the Mount of Olives and looking out over it. And we can imagine, right? He's looking out of this over with almost tears in his eyes, because though he looks in the city of his love, the city of his heart, his delight, Zion itself, he sees a battlefield. He sees death and desolation coming. He sees trials and tribulation, cataclysm, and a total overthrowing of all things. And here he gathers his loyal retinue, his loyal followers, to hear his words, to hear his final major teaching before he goes forward unto his death, before he goes forward unto those who have risen up wickedly against him. And he gives them assurances and hope in this time, and also a task to take heed, to watch, and to pray. And so, brothers and sisters, we have calamities going on all around us, right? The news media is constantly making us feel shocked and awed. We have worries and things that can cause us to get quite distressed. And even in our local lives, right? With losing jobs, family members getting quite ill, ourselves losing the ability maybe to work as hard as we used to, or whatever it might be, loss of a child walking away from the faith, cataclysms in your own lives. Catastrophes in those moments, and how are Christians supposed to react to a society that seems to be flipping on its head, a society that seems to be in full revolt against her king, her high king, the true King of Kings, Lord Jesus Christ, a society that has taken a stand against life and for death. A society that instead encourages suicide, instead of protecting and comforting those who mourn and helping those who die, who suffer, to die well. We have become a country with a wicked heart that's turned away from the Lord. And so what do we do in these moments? Where do we look? Well, Christ, seeing a calamity that's going to come upon his people, seeing a calamity that's going to come upon his disciples, speaks to them words of wisdom. First, he warns them that indeed troubles will come, but that they will have vindication. And he also then tells them that they need to do this, to take heed, to watch, and pray. And so we're going to just go through our text today a little bit and discuss it. And we're going to hit two major points as we look at this. First, what on earth is Jesus talking about? And then what does this mean for us in our time, in our place? And so we're just going to hit these things pretty fast as we now jump into what is this that he's talking about? Because there's stuff seeming to come from all different spheres. It's pretty confusing as you read it. What is he talking about? Who is he talking about? Where is he talking about? And so we can get kind of bogged down in this. And I think part of what we need to understand is how prophecy often works in the Bible, right? Prophecy often has this idea of a threefold or maybe twofold, depending on which one it is, but it often has these different fulfillments. First off, normally there's like a near fulfillment, right? Something that comes that is really short after the prophecy, that sort of seems to hit on some major components of that prophecy, but yet it still falls short. And then sometimes in the prophecies, there's some intermediate fulfillments, or at least echoes, where we're reminded again of the prophecy. And God does this, sort of laying cookie crumbs that are showing us, hey, this thing that I promised is still coming. And then you have the final prophecy. And this we see perhaps best with the prophecy given to David about his son sitting on a throne and having a kingdom forever, right? We know instantly, right, that that's going to be talking about Jesus, the son of David, the great king. But first of all, right near that, right in the proximity there, is this talk about Solomon. And Solomon being this one who fulfills this, right? And he in many ways makes this kind of golden age of the kingdom, and it's this great time. And yet we see that Solomon doesn't fulfill all that he's supposed to do. He falls short. He falls into idolatry. He ends up sending the land towards wickedness and setting a precedence of kind of downward trend in the line of the country and the way that the nation's living. And we don't see this endless kingdom. Instead, we see a collapse of the house of David with a few kind of bursts of light along the way. You get Hezekiah. Boof. Oh, there is great kings. There can be a good king. God promised a greater one. Hezekiah dies. You see Josiah, ooh, another good king, falters and fails near the end. So where is this king? There's this constant wait. We are waiting for the king to come. And in Jesus, that king finally does come. And so when we come to the New Testament, we face a prophecy. I don't think we should be too shocked if there's a similar pattern going on there. And maybe we don't have all the details where we stand now, looking forward, trying to see how all this works out. But we do see some facts in our face here. First off, I think the nearest fulfillment of this is that something, right, is coming that we hear about. Right? We hear that in those days and after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give light. Right? This is some sort of cosmic shaking language. But we see that in some ways the cross, the life and ministry of death and of Jesus, his death and resurrection, indeed are these cosmic shaking realities. The whole world is turned upside down by what Jesus does there. And if we go to Acts 2, I'm not going to read it all, but I would encourage you to head over to Acts 2 and just see that Peter, he quotes Joel. And Joel talks about similar things, right? That the sun will turn to darkness, the moon into blood, and it'll be this great and awesome day of the Lord. And what happens when Jesus comes? And Peter, he points right to this and says, hey, men of Israel, look at Jesus. Jesus was the one attested to by these kind of crazy things happening, by signs in the heavens. And he says, right, God attested to you, this man, by miracles, wonders, and signs, right, in your midst. And as we think about what happened to Jesus, think about this, right? There was this 3-hour darkness, something incredible, as he's on the cross there. And then the earth is shaking. Seems like all of creation is just shuddering at the reality of what's going on. It's falling apart. Something is wrong. And even, right, the temple rocks split open. The veil tears, which in Mark's gospel we'll probably get to a bit later, but is of cosmic significance, right? Pointing to an end of an old order. Right? And this is what is inaugurated in Jesus' death, and then especially, right, in his resurrection and even ascension into the clouds, right? Which captures bits and pieces of this prophecy, right? Jesus has inaugurated something new. And the old is forever shattered. The old is forever undone. And this is what Hebrews chapter 8, verse 13 kind of points to, right? The old is obsolete. And yet there's something interesting there. It's obsolete. It's done for. The old religion, as much as it might still stand, much as there's temple worship still, it is done. It doesn't work anymore. Its promises were all meant to point people to Jesus. It was supposed to draw them to Jesus, and they have rejected Jesus. And if you're continuing it post-Jesus, you're doing it in rebellion. It's nothing. It's false worship. And what he says, interesting in Hebrews 8, 13 and 14, is that what has become obsolete is now drawing to an end. See that in the time of the apostles, it seems as if there was almost this transition period where you have these two systems, one a hollow shell of what it was, and the new faith, the new covenant, side by side for a time. But indeed, the end of the old covenant is soon. The complete end is coming. And this is really where we see this intermediate or central, I would say, or at least a good part of this prophecy comes to the complete destruction of the old covenant. And it's wiping out. And we see this in the fall of Jerusalem. Now, right when we go to the beginning of chapter 13, we remember how this conversation started. We remember that this conversation did not start with something looking out into the end times or anything like that. It started with the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. And so that we can't lose that thread. As much as we want to jump to the end, we should not lose this thread, because indeed that was where it started. All this response is an answer to a question of Peter, James, John, and Andrew about when these things would happen. Namely, that the temple would be thrown down and no stone would be upon another. And so he's going through this and he's talking about this, and we come to this language, right, of the days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars of heaven will fall, and the powers of heavens will be shaken. And we want, right, I think because of our pop culture understanding and maybe pop teaching, we want to just go to this is end of the world age. But whoa, we have to calm down. We have to calm down, because indeed, this type of language is used a few times in the Hebrew Old Testament, so for discussing cataclysmic events, but not world-ending events. Big changes, big judgment, destruction coming upon a nation, but not necessarily the end of the world. We see that in Isaiah 13. He talks about the destruction of Babylon, a judgment upon Babylon, and similar language is brought forth. In Isaiah 34, there's a kind of another sort of judgment passage. And again, we see the world continuing afterwards. And finally, right, also in Ezekiel 32, there's this judgment upon Egypt. And again, it uses this language with temporal judgments. And we must be able to cling some things temporally here. Because the whole language has this idea of this is a judgment, something that's going to happen that you can run away from. This is not, in a part at least, not about the final end, because it's seen as something that's happening directly in Judea. You see in verse 14, it says, "Let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains." It's something you can escape. And furthermore, right? And furthermore, there's this very stark statement of Jesus, that he's speaking to these apostles of troubles that will come upon them. And so he says, "So you also," and he uses "you" twice, "so you also, when you see these things happening, know that it is near at the doors." And then he says this to make it very clear: "Assuredly, I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away." And so, in a major view, we have to see that something big is going to happen in the time period when these people that he's talking to and the generation that they're living amongst will still be alive. This is something that is going to be fulfilled in the near future. We can't lose that fact. And then when we see that indeed that God has promised the people of Israel that if they break the covenant that he has made with them, they will receive covenant curses, that God will bring judgment upon them, we have no reason to not expect that Jerusalem, that Judea would receive a crushing blow. That fire would be poured upon them for their rebellion, because they rejected the king, because they have hated Christ and they have pushed against him. And indeed, Jesus elsewhere, right, talks about the people crying as he goes to be crucified. He said, "Don't cry for me, watch out for yourselves," right? Because it's them, those people there, that are going to face the judgment of God. And if you read through the Deuteronomy curses passages, you see that the judgment is going to be horrendous. And when we read the accounts, the historical accounts of what happens to Judea when they rebel against Rome, we understand that this was a devastating and crushing destruction of the people of Israel. Right? The Romans came in, and the Jews were not able to field an army to fight them on the field, and so what they did was they would stay in the cities, the fortified cities. But this meant that it wasn't just the army that was fighting and maybe dying. It was all the civilians, time and again, that would be subject to sieges. And the Romans had a deliberate strategy that if you didn't surrender, they would utterly eradicate you. They would bring such destruction and desolation to cause fear in the next cities. And so many of these cities fell to the sword. And there's stories about how people wouldn't know that the Romans are coming because of messengers or anything, but from dead bodies floating down the Jordan River. would tell them of the approach of the Romans, that another city had been conquered, another city had fallen. And the Roman armies were closing in. And indeed, as the Jews trusted, instead of trusting to God, instead of heeding their Messiah, instead of repenting and coming to him, as they trusted in their own strength, as they gloried in their own might, and they gloried in their walls and their mighty walls, they found that those walls became prisons to the uttermost depravity of man. And Josephus, this contemporary Jewish writer, talks about just the brutality and the disgusting behavior that happened within those walls. As factions broiled against factions and murderous intent was brought to fruition, and all things fell into chaos. This is what happened to Jerusalem. This is what happened to Judea. They were called to flee by Jesus because he saw this judgment coming. And we can't lose that, but there is something more here, of course. There is something more, because even in that we see little hints of stuff that there must be something else. There must be something else when we hear about Jesus coming in the clouds with great power and glory, when he says he'll send forth his angels to gather his elect from the four winds, from all over the earth. We see that there is inside of this, or mingled in this, even with the above passage of preaching to all the nations first, right? There's some other thing that's coming that is foreshadowed in all this. That Jesus is laying crumbs and saying, yeah, there is Jerusalem, but there is coming a bigger judgment. There is coming a final return of the King. And we see that this is what we long for, right? That the end here talks about a master who's going away and will return. He will return. And 1 Thessalonians 5, right, tells us we don't know when this return will be. And that echoes much of what happens at the end here. In 32, while before he was saying this is going to happen within this generation, 13:32 says, but the day, and now it goes from day and from days to day, and the hour, no one knows, right? Not anyone, not the angels, not the Son, or only the Father. But what we do know from Paul is that it's gonna come as a thief in the night. When everyone says peace and security, you don't need to worry about it, then judgment will come with fire and brimstone, and Jesus will crest that hill with a flaming sword, so to speak, on his white horse, and bring justice and truth, and measure all men by that. Indeed, many things will be toppled. And what he calls for us to be attentive and standing there waiting, ready to meet him as he comes, and that we have been faithfully waiting for him. And so, brothers and sisters, this is where we get into what this means for us. What does this mean for us as we await this time? Well, the first thing that we can see is that while we face struggles, and while we face calamities, and while we face troubles, we don't look to our contemporary events, but we cast our eyes to heaven. But Christ has also left us, and our King sits us down here with a story now. He sits us down here with a story to explain how he wants us to live as in this time between when he has left and when he will return. We're not given to know when he'll return, but he promises us and tells us that indeed he will be coming back. And so what does he want us to take from that? Well, he tells it in a story, and so I'm going to take some creative freedom here and tell it in a story as well. And we can imagine, I'm going to be a bit imaginative here, a king with two knights and their retinues that he assigns to a far northern outpost to guard some icy paths far north, and they're supposed to guard this place, right? And take watch there, and indeed train and make sure they're all up in tip-top shape, and keep this place, and that one day the king will come. He promises them that I'm going to come and visit you there one day, and that when I come, I will give you great things and great blessings and abundant life. But he says, well, beware, lest I come and I find you sleeping. So he gives both a promise but also a warning to these men. And the men, these two knights and their retinues go up there, and they're manning this fort that guards the old icy paths to the north. And they're manning it and, clearing out the forest at first, training diligently, sharpening their swords. It's all going fairly well. They're training and making sure that this is working well. But years start to pass by. And the one knight he kind of starts to think, well, I don't know if indeed this king is going to ever return. It's been a long time that we've been up here, and I haven't even heard any news from him recently. He starts to doubt and to wonder if these promises, if the word of the Lord or the word of the king there that was given to him is actually true and trustworthy. And so slowly he starts to not call his men to work as hard, and he starts to wander away from this, and more they seem to drift away, only coming here and there to attend to the work, and otherwise letting things fall into absolute dilapidation. Their swords grow rusty, their armor dusty, and they go on and take in civilian jobs in the local town. They go settle themselves there and leave behind their duties at the castle, at the fort. And seeing this, the men of the other knight start to also, in the bitter colds of winters, as years go by, the wind seems to slowly blow more and more of them away, as they also wonder, where is this king? Where is this promise? What are we doing up here? As they face different trials and troubles, and they see the pleasures of this life, and they just desire that more, they abandon their posts, until all that's left is one now old knight who continues to stand his ground, continues to stand in his post, weathered and beaten, and yet still faithfully remaining, hoping in the good promise of his good king. You go to town sometimes and be mocked by the townsfolk. Oh, there's old Faithful there, the fool who thinks the king is going to come, living away his life, guarding it for the king. What a fool. They sneer, and the men who had abandoned their posts indeed actually have a hatred for him, because they see him as some pretentious upstart who talks about honor and duty and the importance of waiting on the promises, and they will shout rude things at him and even beat him and hurt him, cause him all manner of trouble, and give him no end of grief about his dedication to this king, about his foolishness of waiting upon the promises of a king who has not been seen for many years. And he goes one night, into his castle, and it's a dark night, and he's sitting there in front of his fire, pondering troubling thoughts in the darkness of his loneliness there by himself on the lonely path. And he hears a knock at the door, and he goes forth and he checks, and it's some old man in a dark robe, and he goes and opens it up, and this guy comes in, and he sits him down and gives him some food to eat, and the old man starts to ask him why he's here alone in this castle. And the guard and this old knight says, well, I'm waiting for the king. The king told me to be here, so I'm waiting for him. And this guy starts to laugh hysterically. You mean you've been waiting here all this time for the king? I heard someone said he died, or he went off somewhere else. He didn't really care. He's left. No one's heard about him in ages. He's gone. What are you doing? You're wasting your time. That king, even if he is alive, I'm sure. This place, have you seen where you are? You're on the fringe. No one cares about this place, and especially not some king. Oh, he probably just, even if he's still alive, he probably forgot about his promise to you. You're like a nobody. You're a nothing. And imagine if he even did show up. What would he come to? This place has fallen into disrepair with only you here. And look at you. You're some old, scraggly knight with arthritis and a frostbitten face. What do you have to offer a great king? What does your faithfulness mean to him? You're a fool. The knight, well worn from trials, looks at the fire, his heart darkened by these sayings. Is it perhaps true that the king forgot his word to me? Is it perhaps true that he has forgotten about this? Maybe he's dead. Where is he gone? I haven't heard from him. I don't know. He looks up and he sees on this mantle of his fireplace the crest of the king, a lamb that appeared as if it was slain. And he remembers, he's reminded in his heart, no, my king is a good king, and he promised that he would come, and I can take that as a surety. And so he gets up and he looks this man in the eye and he says, heaven and earth might pass away, but the word of my king, the word that he gave to me, that he promised me, shall never pass away. And so you are a fool and a slanderer to speak ill against my king. Out with you, heathen. Be gone. And he quickly shoos this dark-robed man away, saying he better count his blessings that he didn't slay him there for such insults to the good king. The next day, the knight wakes up and he's dealing with all the regular chores, the mundane tasks of fixing doors and sweeping dust away, and maybe fixing some bricks as best he can in these days, sharpening his sword. And he casts his eyes onto the eastern hills, looking to see maybe the king will come. It is morning, and he's hopeful, but he sees again, as he has for many years, nothing. He goes about his work a bit more and looks again. This time, fluttering there in the distance is the king's banner coming forth, and he soon sees a whole host of men coming forth, and then as he climbs up to the tower over the gate and he looks out, he sees the face that he has been waiting for years, the face of his beloved king coming forth, smiling at him. He goes down quickly, he opens the door and gets ready and presents himself in his dusty old armor in the middle of a pretty war-torn or rubble-ish kind of fortress, and he looks around and thinks, oh, well, I don't know what the king will think about this. They don't know what the king will think about me. I'm not much. And he sits there a bit fearful of what the king might say, and the king comes in and he throws off all decorum and runs to this knight and grasps him and says, my beloved servant, I have long waited to grasp you and hug you. I had reasons for my delay, for many have been saved through your work. He quickly robes him with robes and splendors and titles beyond his belief, and invites him back to a place of honor and at the king's table in a royal banquet. And as they're riding onwards back to the capital city, there he sees a bunch of men trotting chained and tied up. Men he looks and he sees them, he recognizes them, disheveled and beaten. Men who had mocked him, men who had hurled insults and even beaten him. Going the other way, going north. And he asked the king, what is happening to them? He said, those who were sleeping, those who denied faith, who turned their back on me, they shall be cast out into outer darkness, into the great cold north, where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. And so, judgment and justice had come, and the faithful had been rewarded. So this story that we have there, and I know perhaps that was a bit long, and I might have used up some of my time to do that, but I hope that it illustrates this call upon our lives to be found faithful despite it all, to have walked in the way of the Lord. And so Jesus gives us a few things to just ponder on, and he gives us three sort of commands as he departs. As he gathers his loyal band here, and he tells them what they are to do with his final real teaching. Take heed, watch, and pray. Right? Take heed is quick, right? That beware, brothers and sisters. Beware that there will be troubles. There will be things on all sides. It will be strife and difficulty. But fear not. Fear not, brothers and sisters. Because the Lord is going to come and vindicate you. The Lord is going to come and bring justice, bring truth, and bring righteousness, and collect his faithful saints. Indeed, this is the hope that is presented when we hear that the Lord is going to come robed in glory, coming in the clouds. This is a great hope that we can know our Lord is going to return. And this is what Isaiah, we didn't get to read it this week because of the snow day, but Isaiah 51 has this great push where it says, why fear? Don't worry about the slander. Don't worry about the reproaches, even the physical reproaches of wicked men, because they will be done away with. They will become dust. This is also echoed in the first Psalm. The unrighteous, they are like chaff. They will be blown away. Give them no heed. In Isaiah 51, as you go further in it, it says, why fear men? Why fear the Son of Man? They pass away like grass of the field. They are like nothing. Righteousness of the Lord, his word, his truth, his goodness lasts forever. And those who have that law in their hearts will as well. Our eyes in troubles, our eyes in difficulties are cast upwards because we know our King is coming and he will come in the clouds of glory. And so we have hope in the midst of tribulation. And though, yes, we are wary of all sorts of deceits and trials and things that would push us from that path because we await that King. We await that King who will come. And he tells us to watch. And I think this is the central purpose of his story here at the end. His central purpose, the master is going away. Yes, he's going to a faraway country. Not that Jesus will be far away and distant from us, that he's not close, but he's there in a different way. He's not going to be in their presence anymore in the physical sense of it. But he will return. He's going away and he wants you to keep watch, to keep guard, to keep faithful attendance to the duties that he has given you. And this is where it says, right, that he is gone and he has given authority and work to each of his servants. Right? And so this is what we're called to. We don't know when the Lord is coming, and that's what 1 Thessalonians 5 kind of wants to emphasize. We don't know. He's coming as a thief in the night. I don't need to tell you that. But what we do is we put on the breastplate of faith and love, the helmet of hope, and we work in the authority and the work that God has given us to do in the places we are found. We are sort of like heavenly preppers, always preparing ourselves, always guarding our hearts, always aiming ourselves heavenward, ready for the day when heaven comes to earth with all its glory and all its justice and all its truth. And we do this with this baptized righteousness, with this gift that has been given to us, because we realize that we have been appointed for better things. We've been appointed for better things, not appointed to wrath, but in our baptisms, in the receiving of God's word, in the regeneration of our hearts, we have been appointed unto life. And so we walk as sons and daughters of light, as 1 Thessalonians would call us. And we see that in our times and places, our Lord has given us sort of spheres of authority. He's given us different positions and ranks in society, different positions in families, and different spheres in which we are to work. There is a givenness to our lives that God has given. And unlike the rest of society, which pushes against this and rebels against that and wants to see themselves as, they can all make their own person, and we don't need to totally throw some of that freedom idea away. But we need to trust and cling to what is the givenness of life. What has God given me? Who has he given me? And realize we're not just individual. We're placed within the society with relations, duties, and tasks given to us. And so we understand that authority always exists from above to below. So it always exists from heaven. And it goes it's given to us in different amounts, in different areas, in different places. And it is not for ourselves, but it's for the sake of those further below. those who are underneath us, those who we find, those things or people that we find underneath us that are given into our care. As servants, not as lords, as those who are stewards of these things, we're given work. And so what we're called to in our lives, in our vocations, our callings, we want to find out, where have we been given authority? What is my sphere that God has given us? And we want to let the Bible teach us about these things. And so as a father, recognize that you have indeed been given authority from heaven. Not from government, from anywhere else, but from heaven over your family. You are considered the head of your household. You are the leader, and so you are called to take responsibility over that family. To take responsibility for when they fall, to pray vigorously for them, and to realize that you are called to be their household head, to lead them into godliness, to lead them into love of Lord and love of neighbor in all that you do. Moms, you too are given authority. Authority over the children that you care for, authority over grandchildren, and authority in different spheres that you find yourselves in. Of course, with jobs and vocations, there comes different authorities as well. But in those things, to care and have compassion over children, students, authority. Maybe you look around and you think, I have no authority. I have nothing. But you do have responsibility and authority over your own hands, over your own minds and the studies that you have undertaken, to learn these things for the sake of your neighbor, for the sake of those who either one day will be underneath you, or maybe for the sake of serving those above you. A young man, perhaps. You have been given maybe authority over vehicles, of crews. You have been given this authority and indeed this responsibility before the Lord. Take care of it. Seek to do it well. Look after these crews. Look after those vehicles. Seek to perform your task in faithfulness for the sake of those below you. And in all this, right, as we think about authority, we want to be sure that we're not trying to reach out and snatch someone else's authority and claim it for ourselves, because sinful temptation will have us desiring the authority given to a different slave, or a different servant rather than to seek our own work. It doesn't mean you don't aim for higher positions of power or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. But when you don't have those positions, not to move yourself and take them by force for yourself. No. Instead, you mind what has been given to you to do and work diligently to make sure that what is under your control, what is your business, is done well and faithfully in service of the Lord and neighbor. And so what are the applications of this as we watch and wait, faithfully walking with hope towards heaven, with love in our hearts and faithful trust in our Lord's promises? What does this look like? What does faithfulness look like? Well, with mom with yogurt spilling everywhere, with kids running around, with mayhem in the house. God will find you faithful. He will come with a great smile on his face, joyful to see you, embrace you when he finds you there at your post. Yes, maybe ragged and tired, but faithful to do your work, to be the mom that he called you to be. A wife with an ailing husband who is no longer able to give the compassion that he used to, who's no longer able to do all the loving things that he used to be able to do, but instead is almost incapable of anything. The Lord will take great pleasure in finding you at his bedside, caring for him, even in his weakness. Young men, in a society where the world seems to be geared against you, where you are slandered and insulted and seem to be sort of cast as the great villains of this age. Ignore their taunts, ignore their bullying, ignore the wicked men who speak ill. Stand up for virtue, stand up for truth, stand up for goodness, and work hard and succeed as best you can, and grumble not, and don't make excuses for yourself. But instead, when the Lord comes, may he find you faithfully guarding the gates, fighting off his foes and speaking truth into a dark world full of lies, speaking light into a dark world full of hate. Brothers, young men, do not lose heart. but stand vigorous. Make sure that the Lord, when he comes, he finds you. When he comes, he finds you at your post, not lost in video games or lost in your phones, as it's so easy for us to become. Not lost in the pleasures of life, but serving him with all vitality. This doesn't mean we can't take breaks, no. But brothers, we are called to a responsibility. We are called to work and to be at our posts, diligent in our labors. Fathers who've maybe struggled with work in this time, in this period, or are just struggling with the load of their work, where they are, and they're trying their best to find their calling there. Recognize the Lord has you where he does. His hand has placed you there. And even if you find yourself without a job and confused about what all happened, and you find yourself in a stressful situation, see that indeed in this moment, God has called you still. And he will be delighted with you, and you will see his great smile when he finds you faithfully sitting around the table with your family, praying for their hearts, calling them to godliness and righteousness, calling them to faithful service of their Lord. Young ladies, with all the different things going on in your lives as you try and figure out your path in life and what you're seeking, whether this is through education or trying to find a spouse or wherever you are in that. Sometimes it can be overwhelming and you can feel that pressure, but be faithful where you are today. And yes, look to the future and see how you can best serve your neighbor and use your gifts to the fullest extent, but also consider your mothers. Love and cherish them and give honor and support to them. Respect your fathers. Speak well about them and to them. And listen to their words, which might not seem wise to you now, but indeed might have wisdom beyond your understanding. In all this, family of God, we have swirling a wild world that we find ourselves in. Lots of trials, lots of tribulation. It is kind of a crazy place that we find ourselves in, and crazy mini environments, with all the kids, all the craziness of work, all the struggles there, and we can sometimes just despair of it all. But God has placed us in this time, and I think instead of despairing, we should hear the words of Gandalf to Frodo, that we don't get to choose the time in which we find ourselves. We don't get to choose to live in a time where Christianity was valued in our nation. We don't get to live in different times. We live now with our trials and our struggles. Our only task, our responsibility is, what shall we do with this time? And so, God calls us to watch. Finally, he also calls us to pray. To come before him and realize that, yes, he's given us these tasks. Yes, he's put us in these places. And yes, he calls us to wait. But recognize this time and again, you will fail, you will struggle, and you will be unable to do this. In your own strength, you have no hope whatsoever of accomplishing this. And so God calls you, Jesus calls you to prayer, to call upon strength, because he never meant for you to face these challenges alone. He never meant for you to fight this fight by yourself. No, he calls you to diligently come before him in prayer. Out of your helplessness, out of your weakness, recognizing you don't have the strength, calling upon his strength for that help in all the moments of your life. So friends, when we find disasters, we find struggles, we look heavenward. We find troubles and trials, when we see the world coming against us, we do not fear. We, with our helmets of hope on, we march forward, looking forth to the coming of our King. And Jesus leaves us with those words: take heed, watch, and pray. And so let us be found when Christ comes again. When Christ comes again, let us be found as faithful servants awaiting their King's return. Amen.